Here, so Richard Branson's Masterclass.
This is unbelievable. This is too unbelievable. But at the end of that day, at the end of that week, because I had the training as well, I had, 35, a list of 35 things.
Let's review it before I get copyrighted. So, maybe my most favorite masterclass so far. Not gonna lie, I really look up to this guy. And I've actually had a lot of other his books as well. Screw it, let's do it the version way. Finding my virginity. But anyways, this masterclass, especially because I listened to a lot of his stuff and I've read a lot of his books, this masterclass was actually worth all of it. Because it actually showed a lot of the recordings and clips from all those events and his stories he talks about, like the voyage across the Atlantic or the first, like, the prank he did with British Airways, the publicity stunts. Surprisingly, they didn't include Coca Cola in the masterclass, but maybe for some reason, you don't want to diss Coca Cola publicly. But anyhow, aside from that, let's get into it. The key takeaways from this overall uh, course program, everything. The first one was obviously he started the student magazine and later on the screw it mentality. Screw the traditional way of doing things, screw the rules, screw the laws, screw the limitations people set on you, and do what you want to do. A risky idea, a difficult idea, something innovative, difficult, whatever, just do it. This guy got arrested for using the word venereal disease. And guess what? The court had to change the law for arresting people for using it. Later on, I think he got arrested with the Sex Pistols using the word bullocks in the album. And that was a funny story as well. A priest came in. But anyhow, aside from that, a very, very interesting story. I won't get too deep into it because I can talk about this whole day. Yeah, I do look a lot into Richard Branson, but anyhow, let's just go over the key takeaways. The first one would be creative publicity. So Richard has always been short on money, and you would imagine that would have stopped him from uh, doing all these ventures and taking all these risks he did. Nope, definitely not. Instead, he got more creative, came up with iconic solutions, pranks, or just using other people's, other companies, the competitors at advantage to publicize his own stuff. Like, I remember they would talk about how he would make counter ads to their existing ads and then just use those to gain a lot of publicity. But as well as starting businesses without any money. The student magazine. This was a very interesting key takeaway. He had no money for it, but instead of getting a partner or an investor on something, he just called these companies and got them to pay in advance for the ad revenue from his school's phone booth. Seriously. And the confidence he had to make those calls actually close the deal brings out the possibilities, right? Doesn't it? That you can get something like that done. But, anyways, moving on. Taking businesses like extreme adventures. This was an interesting takeaway from the masterclass. So, a lot of businesses that Virgin Richard has done have been very difficult. But he has also taken a lot of adventures. And this mentality was very appealing to me. So, you go on an adventure and you face all of these challenges, climbing a mountain, for example. But it's still thrilling, it's still fun, you still do it. Same thing with business. Something shitty happens, you face it with a smile, and you do everything in your power to get to the finish line. It is an adventure. Alright? Then, moving on to another next key takeaway. A very, very interesting one. Thinking really big to solve little problems. So, when they were starting Virgin Airline, uh, Richard was the first one who came up with the idea of the in-flight entertainment system they have at the back of the seats, because he wanted it to be entertaining, the overall experience, something he has done constantly across all the ventures. But he went to the banks and they wouldn't loan him 10 million to put the in-flight entertainment system in the back of the seats. Guess what? He was just sitting one day looking at the ceiling and comes up with this idea that he calls Boeing and asks them, would they be interested, would they consider, he's interested in buying 10 more 747 jets for them if they include the in-flight systems. And guess what? He raised $2 billion to buy those jets. That was more easier to get it done because, I mean, already has the airline and everything. It makes sense. The banks would loan him the amount for the jets, but not for the in-flight entertainment system. Crazy, isn't it? So you set such a high goal or target that it takes care of the little problems. That was an interesting analogy. Then here was another good takeaway. Instead of going public with your main company, you keep control of it for many years and then set up subsidiary companies which you go public with. So I remember this is not something he delved that deep into in the masterclass, but in his books, how when they made Virgin public, he was stuck in the board meetings and they just made everything so difficult, which was completely contrary to existing Virgin's ideology of whenever they would get an idea, they would just move on with it. And now they had to convince investors and these guys who have never actually done a business or anything like that on wow, taking a really small decision is a good idea. They ended up buying the company back. But anyways, so you essentially make it public, the subsidiaries, but retain control of the main parent company. Also, this was a very thought-provoking, very interesting approach to the traditional marketing business startup pathways that most entrepreneurs take. Richard found obviously the one to fund the company without any external investor, so he didn't give up any control of the company. Owns 100% of Virgin, which is very interesting. So, like, there are no other people who can go against him in terms of making the decisions and everything, which is one of the reasons he has that level of flexibility and control and why he can pursue other companies and directors to agree to his proposals because he owns the whole company. But still, very interesting approach. Moving on. Crossing the Atlantic in the hot air balloon. Why you should always stay calm and do everything you can instead of panicking and making an immediate choice, which sometimes creates more problems down the line. So there's obviously the story where he decided to go across the Atlantic in a hot air balloon. And, well, something goes wrong with the hot air balloon, the winds pick up a lot of speed. So they have to land in the sea. Well, Pierre, the guy who was actually handling it, jumps in the water. But guess what? Because his weight reduced, the balloon goes up, rises high into the air. So Richard has to have these two choices at the moment. He can either jump with a parachute or do some other jump with a raft, I think, I'm not sure. But either way, jumping in the North Atlantic Sea, very rare, it's freezing, you can't really survive it. So he was considering it very seriously until he decided he's going to go back and write a note to his family saying that he loves them. When he comes up with the idea that I'm already sitting in a very good parachute, the hot air balloon is the biggest parachute ever made. So he just lowered the hot air balloon and then onto the sea and just stayed there. And then luckily, luck plays a role. The British Navy helicopters were doing a drill nearby. They came up and rescued him. Surprising, isn't it? But yeah, if he had jumped in earlier instead of waiting and thinking things out until the last minute, he might not have survived today and we wouldn't have Virgin Atlantic. Then obviously there's this amazing story with how he founded Virgin Air. So he got stuck in Puerto Rico, I think, and American Express, I think they canceled the flight. The flights back then were not enough passengers, so they just canceled it. So what he does, he manages to charter a plane. So this is a really good lesson because when we get stuck in problems, what do? We just give up or something, complain a bit, or toughen out or whatever. Here's another approach. So he charters a private jet for $2,000. And then he borrows a blackboard and writes on it Virgin Airways, $39. He does the math. It will take $39 per seat to cover the entire cost of the charger. And he moves around with the blackboard. Anyone who wants to get the seat, it's for $39. He fills out the whole airplane. And he actually makes a profit. He saves up 2 seats. So he gets his seat for free. And then he just goes on, and that was the birth of Virgin Air. Pretty interesting, isn't it? How, I mean, I'm sure there were other people stranded with him on the island. Sorry, in Puerto Rico. Why didn't they come up with this idea? Nothing special. Didn't even require cash in a way. Just initiative. Interesting, isn't it? But anyways, I think I will talk more about this in the other book review. Screw it, let's do it. But moving on. Reality show to find talent. So he wanted to hire people. The traditional hiring method doesn't work, but I think so the problem was that you can't like push them to that limit. So he just started a reality show for it, but where he tested them out in an interesting way. One of them pretending to be a taxi driver and noticing how the people talk to the taxi driver or not. But that was interesting. Focus on the person, not the resume. Uh, Bulk of the people he hired had no experience whenever he was setting up a new company, Virgin Railway or whatever. You're not asked questions like, what's your university experience or whatever during the interview. You actually try to judge who they are as a person. Sometimes ask them to send a video of you. But essentially, you just see how they are. How they do they smile more, how they talk about. And then once you've figured your team out, you step away from it. And then you let them do their thing, and then you just come in once it's needed. That's how he was able to build all these multiple companies and expand. Otherwise, he would have just stuck with one company. That is something he says himself. So you spend the first 3 months being fully immersed in the company, handling everything. Then you bring someone else in to handle the day-to-day operations. Then you just move on and do your own thing and look at the bigger picture. And whenever something really terrible goes wrong, you come out to handle it. That was an interesting takeaway. And he became the best delegator because he had dyslexia. He didn't know until 20 he had dyslexia. But he had to depend on a lot of people for that, which enabled him to learn how to delegate things to people. Something Virgin takes pride in. And I admire their people dealing approach. I don't think he's that big on firing people how a lot of other entrepreneurs or successful businessmen are like. Instead, creating that culture of safety, security, letting them come up with ideas, having fun. And, Richard is famous for saying this, if you treat your workers, your staff right, then they will treat your customers right. And that does resonate a lot. But anyways, moving on. So you also need to be very hands-on with your company dealing. So you go in and you talk to your staff. Don't be stuck in a board meeting. So this he jokes about how the word sums up his impression of board meetings. They're very boring, and you get bored during the board meeting. And he hasn't been in one since 20, 30 years. Surprising, isn't it? Instead, you go to the company floor, you talk to the staff, you get their feedback, you test your own product. As a public guy, and you make a list of improvements. So, like first-hand, frontline handling of the situation. And then, so he talks about he was talking to a clerk, just generally chatting, and he gave some really good ideas, answers. So Richard was like, "You seem to know what you're talking about. Why don't you come to the office next to mine and then just help me out with all the things?" Literally, just like that. And that guy was Ken Berry, I think, who went on to become like a very good director and manager of Virgin. You just picked him up while talking to him. You don't need qualifications for everything, right? You judge people based on their role. And then, yeah, the last one was don't take yourself too seriously and have fun with the business process. So Richard has always had fun. Um, getting has gotten arrested as well, but the publicity he said was usually worth it. Pretty interesting. But yeah, if you have fun, the money will follow. That is one of his sayings, which I have never been able to properly grasp. But I do admire this guy, how he does this so easily with a smile on his face. I really admire that strength of his. And while here we are, who are just like getting engraved in all of these problems. And then Richard is dealing with people in a fun way. Like what you actually want to do, but you come up with all these reasons why you can't do it. And you justify why you have to fire people and why you have to get stuck in work and why you can't have fun or whatever. He actually does all of it and makes it work. Owns 100% of the company, has fun, gets arrested, takes like drastic risks, and build a legacy who went to space, all of these things, which the traditional entrepreneurs, Silicon Valley guys or whatever, mindset, venture capitalist mentality didn't get us. But yeah, Disruptive Entrepreneurship Masterclass, definitely something worth checking out. I highly recommend it.